Icon and Rocket is the final title of Milestone's initial lineup, and it features one of the biggest title changes, actually. When Milestone originally debuted in the 1990s, the Superman-esque hero known as Icon ruled the roost. This was his book, and its title reflected that. It was simply called Icon. But one of the biggest characters in that title was actually Icon's partner. Do not call her a sidekick. The passionate woman called Rocket. Rocket wasn't just a part of Icon's life, like a background character or, like I said, a sidekick. She was a character in her own right, and intending to give her the spotlight that she earned, Milestone gave Rocket co-billing this time around. This initial series, which ran for 6 issues, was written by Reginald Hudland and, starting with issue 3, Leon Chills. Pencils were done by Doug Braithewaite, inks were by Hanna Andrew Currie, and the coloring was all done by Brad Anderson. Now, despite the two characters already being superheroes when the Big Bang happens, and in theory, we start paying attention to the Milestone universe, their own comic nicely opens up with their respective origins. Icon is actually an alien named Arnis. He was aboard a ship with his fellows crossing space for some reason when a terrorist escaped from their host and sabotaged the ship. The terrorist had been hiding in the body of one of Arnis's people who were in hibernation, if you're wondering. For some reason, Arnis thought that something was off about that person, and so he did not go into hibernation. He stayed awake in order to watch. Once the terrorist left the body, he confronted him and tried to kill him, but a bomb planted earlier detonated. This gave the terrorist time to reach an escape pod and flee. Arnis was forced to do the same, watching as the ship carrying his people blew up. His escape pod landed on Earth in 1843, crashing in a sugar field in Georgia. A pair of slaves found the pod in the night. When the woman of the pair, named Mary, touched the pod, she activated a hidden protection program within it. In order to ensure the survival of whoever was inside, the pod transformed Arnis into a form resembling one of their young. So, when the pod opened, the couple did not find a 6-foot-tall green-skinned alien with bug eyes inside of it. Instead, there was a small, crying, black human infant inside. This is all that we are told at the beginning of the comic, and as the book goes on, and we find old threats that Icon has faced before, we are told more, so I'm just going to skip to that part for the sake of the narrative and giving you folks all you need to know about Icon. Arnis was then renamed Augustus Freeman and grew up on that plantation. At some point, his alien heritage awakened within him. He appears to be in his late teens or early 20s. His superhero physique makes it kinda hard to tell. All of his old memories came flooding back, as did his powers. Augustus gained super strength, durability, the ability to fly, super speed, and the ability to unleash energy from his body, generally in the form of heat vision. He kicked the old masters off the plantation and declared it a free territory. Naturally, this was not taken well in the 1800s South, and so he faced soldiers, assassination attempts, and armies. But his powers allowed him to shrug off humanity's primitive weapons, and as his legend grew, more and more escaped slaves flocked to him. When he was surrounded by a small army, they marched to the capital of the Confederacy, and Augustus took the head of President Jefferson Davis. He emerged from the burning ruins of the Capitol building untouched, his eyes glowing an angry red, the lifeless head held high, and a large pointed stake was rammed through his heart. This was done by another alien, the very terrorist that Augustus had faced in space. The character had gone by many names over the years, but at the time of the story when we meet it, it calls itself Benedict Lord. Lord is a shapeshifter and can look totally human, although his I suppose I should say their. I mean, if they're a shapeshifter, I don't really know what gender they are. Their true form looks like a human-sized cockroach kind of thing. They are also super durable and incredibly strong. Over the years, Lord has worked for the American government as an alien threat eliminator. It was actually at their behest that he attempted to kill Augustus during the Civil War. But clearly, Augustus survived, despite his wound. Since then, Augustus has lived in the shadows. It's hinted that he has done work for the American government over the time, but when our story opens, they've got a cold truce going on. Augustus has largely retired from using his superpowers in any public way. It would draw attention to himself, and, if that attention scared anyone important, it might force a new confrontation with Lord. Augustus has a law office, which he owns, and lives a quiet life in his mansion in the Dakota City neighborhood called Paris Island. This is where we meet Raquel Irvin. Raquel was dating a loser named Anthony, called Ant by his friends and Raquel, and he needed her to sneak into that old, spooky-looking mansion one day. The plan was to find something worth money so that Ant could use it to buy Raquel a gift, an old-school-style typewriter that she extremely coveted. But Raquel was the only one small enough to break into the building, so she does, and then lets the boys inside. Once they're in, they're taking the place in, and of course they are found by Augustus, who uses his powers to confront and scare the absolute crap out of them. Ant pulls a gun, a small 6-shooter, and in a panic he fires off 2 shots. They do absolutely no damage to Augustus, demonstrating his invulnerability. Augustus orders them to clean up their lives and never speak of what they've experienced here. If they can hold to that, then he'll let them go. If they break their word, he will hunt them down and punish them. Raquel uses this moment to reflect on her life. She spends the night thinking about what happened, and the next day, she actually goes back to the mansion. But this time, she knocks on the door. When Augustus answers, he asks what she wants, and she replies that she wants to start her life over. Ant is a loser, and honestly, she knows it, but she doesn't want to be lonely, and all the nice guys are scared of her. But now that she has seen what Augustus can do, she figures that this is her one chance to get a clean start, and so she is going to go big, right? She thinks that they should be superheroes. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 22.6, Icon and Rocket. Augustus is initially super reluctant to do this. It is not his business to save people, much less a people that he is not even truly a part of. But he does let Raquel make her argument. She says that he is too rich, too educated, and clearly too powerful to stay hidden in the shadows. They can do good, and they can make things better, but only if they try. These words spark a memory in Augustus's mind, one of his love in Paris of 1921. She made a very similar argument back then. Augustus finally agrees with Raquel, and the pair introduce themselves and shake hands, beginning their partnership. Raquel is the one who actually designs their costumes, by the way. Icon is clearly meant to be evocative of Superman. He wears a skin-tight number with a small, squat vertical rectangle on his chest, like a capital I, which is surrounded by a quartered circle. The coloration of the costume is red, black, green, and gold, evoking the colors of many African countries' flags. Rocket, meanwhile, wears a blue and gray costume. Her top exposes her midriff, and a chunky technological belt circles her waist. That is her power belt, where she gets her powers from. The belt absorbs kinetic energy through a force field that surrounds Rocket at all times. So if you shoot at her, the bullets will hit the force field, the kinetic energy from the bullets will be absorbed by it, and she can then channel that energy into a devastating punch. She literally turns the force of her attackers back on themselves. She wears a short brown jacket over the top, and she has on big orange goggles as well. If I have any basic complaint about Icon and Rocket, it is that their looks don't really say anything. Superhero costumes are meant to be immediately identifiable, right? They are meant to immediately sell you on whatever that character is about. You look at Captain America, and you get it. He's a super soldier fighting to defend American values. He's wearing red, white, and blue, reminds you of the American flag, he's got the big A on his forehead, and he's fighting with a shield. Not a gun, not a sword, a shield. You look at Superman, similar thing, you get it. He's a big, strong, tough guy, a defender who doesn't need weapons, and he's a hero based, again, on his color scheme. Bright primary colors, and then an American hero because of the red, white, and blue. But I look at someone like Rocket, and I couldn't tell you anything about her based on her design. It certainly screams superhero, for sure, but I have no idea what kind of superhero she's supposed to be. If anything, superheroes with goggles have taught me that they should have super speed, not punching powers. Both of the characters kind of have that same idea as Superman, right? They carry no weapons, they need no weapons, they are the weapons. If anything, I think that their designs are relying on the audience being very familiar with other superheroes. Icon evokes the same concepts as Superman in terms of his physical nature. His face is uncovered, he has on a long cape, he carries no weapons, but then his colors are generally darker in hue, which makes him seem more threatening. Rocket makes me think of Rogue from the X-Men with her half-jacket look, and her powers do kind of echo Rogue's invulnerability and her "I'm gonna punch you and enjoy it, sugar" style of fighting from the 90s. To some degree, this kind of visual shorthand makes sense. The audience that Milestone is selling to are familiar with these characters, so borrowing elements or themes can work as a conceptual shorthand. But it also kind of annoys me, as it reduces the uniqueness of Icon and Rocket, and it makes their designs, ironically, seem less iconic. From there on, the basic ongoing plot of the book is Icon and Rocket attacking the drug trade. Rocket's mother often works until dark and has to walk home at night, and she's just scared for her. There are drug dealers everywhere, there are robbers everywhere, gang members are on every street corner. Initially, all that Raquel wants to do is clean up her neighborhood and make it a safe place for her family. So she and Icon focus on driving out the drug dealers. But then the drug dealers' bosses, the drug lords, aren't just willing to give up a whole neighborhood of profits, and so they push back. The police, unhappy with someone else doing their jobs for them, making them look bad, start to put pressure on Icon and Rocket as well. They actually visit Raquel's mother at her apartment, claiming to know that Raquel is Rocket, and you know what? They just want to talk. They are run off by another character, who I'll get to in a minute, and then the story just continues to escalate from there. You see, disrupting the drug trade in Paris Island wasn't quite enough to secure Paris Island, so Icon and Rocket then begin to attack the people who make the drugs in the first place. They burn poppy fields in Afghanistan and China, they destroy cocaine refineries in Colombia, and basically disrupt the global drug trade. This then affects the global economy. Banks are no longer washing the drug money that comes in, or receiving their payments for doing that work. The expensive lifestyle items that come from selling drugs, like owning expensive cars, or homes, or stylish clothes, or buying expensive food, now all of that stuff isn't getting purchased anymore. Bribes are not being paid. Money laundering businesses have no incoming money to launder. And economies all over the world are grinding to a halt. This is seen as a threat by the United States government, and so they unleash Benedict Lord on Icon and Rocket. Using his government contacts, Lord attacks Mrs. Irvin, Raquel's mom, first, drawing out our heroes. He is more than a match for them, shrugging off their heat blasts or their superpowered punches. Even with help from a third superhero, they struggle to prevent him from harming innocents as they just brawl in the city. Eventually, though, Lord flees, but his attack forces Icon to take Mrs. Irvin to one of his hidden underwater safe houses for protection. I suppose this is where I should bring up the third party in our narrative, a warrior woman named Xiomara. Xiomara is very tall, like 6 foot plus, and she is well built and beautiful. She poses as Mrs. Irvin's lawyer in order to run off those cops that I mentioned earlier, but she is really part of a group called the Love Corps. The Love Corps defend the world according to and using their own version of love, whatever that means. Xiomara thinks that Rocket would make an excellent addition to their ranks, and it's clear that's where her main interests in the duo lie. She has your standard set of superhero superpowers. I'm talking invulnerability, super strength, and kinda surprisingly telepathy. As the book goes on, she and Icon have a meeting/date, and it does seem clear to me that she is attracted to him, but Icon's thoughts at the time were on the threat of Lord, not romancing a woman, so it doesn't really seem to go anywhere. With their superpowered lives a bit of a mess, Augustus insists that they lay low for a minute. Raquel hasn't been going to school while doing the drug-busting stuff. See their appearance in Milestone returns. And so now she returns to school. At school, she meets Virgil Hawkins, aka Static, and he does try to ask her out. She isn't interested, as she's got bigger things going on, and then Ant approaches her. He tries to win her back by giving her that old typewriter that she wanted, but he admits that he stole it, missing the whole lesson of their encounter with Augustus. A new classmate, Bryce Hamilton, asks Raquel for help getting around the school. And he's a tall, handsome young man who is neither of these two boys. So they head off together and end up spending the day. Bryce's parents actually bought the lake house just outside of Dakota, he says. Apparently a bunch of famous writers lived there or something? Raquel actually knows about the place. Toni Morrison wrote the libretto for Margaret Garner there. They could check it out, Bryce offers. Cut a couple of classes and he can have her back home by dinner. Raquel agrees, and they head to the lake house. If you're thinking that sounds really sounds like a trap, congratulations, you're right. A shadowy group, which we'll learn is called System, but it's an acronym like S.Y. so on and so forth, and we're not told what that acronym stands for at all. System sends 4 superpowered weirdos who aren't given names, and they're just a group of weird-looking people, to attack a bridge in Dakota. Icon and Xiomara respond, abandoning their date, and they easily handle the threat, which allows them to realize that something more has to be going on. They rush to Rocket's location, where it turns out Bryce has drugged her and stolen her power belt from her bag. He chucks the belt into the woods and reveals that he is actually the alien Benedict Lord, and he tries to kill her. Rocket isn't just willing to lie down and die, though, despite the fact that she's been drugged. She runs, she dodges, and even when Lord stabs her through the calf, she does not give up. She makes her way towards the belt, reaching out for it, needing it. And very conveniently, there is a genetic key to the belt that we had not been told about previously. It not only works just for Raquel, but it also has a proximity-based return system. So when Raquel gets close to it, it just auto-flies back to her. Proximity return system, thy name is Deus Ex Machina. Raquel straps on the belt, and all that does is allow her to not die when Lord punches her. Like, even with the belt on, she's not keeping up. Rocket is getting her situation rocked, which is when Static shows up. He thought that the new guy was kinda sketchy, so he followed her just in case. Raquel isn't happy about that, but, she is alive, so, trade-offs, I guess. They manage to stay alive long enough for Icon and Xiomara to arrive. They take up the fight, and Xiomara deploys another hero to help them out, a shrinking woman named Lilbit. The heroes coordinate, they gather up against Lord, and Lilbit shrinks him. Icon then smashes him under his heel with a super strong foot. Afterwards, back in town, Mrs. Irvin is returned to her fixed apartment, much to her own dismay. Turns out that Icon's underwater hideout has robot servants, and she really came to like those guys. Augustus and Raquel then oversee the construction of a new drug rehab center in Paris Island. Stopping the drugs isn't enough to fix the problem, so now they need to help the people lift themselves up. Along those lines, now that Augustus has proven himself to her, Mrs. Irvin has agreed to enroll Raquel in a better school, one where the future leaders of the world are being taught. And Raquel is excited to hear it, but it's in Switzerland. At the end of the issue, we see Icon's former contact at the NSA, who he threatened during the course of the story, join those shadowy figures who sent the supergoons as a distraction. She hates the feeling of defeat that Icon put in her, and she tells Alva Edison that she never wants to feel it again. The old man assures them all that this is merely a temporary setback. Now, their interests are no longer divided. They are bonded together now like a well-oiled machine. Now, they're a system. You might remember the system getting name-dropped back at the end of Hardware. Its existence was one of the things revealed in the incriminating documents that Asher Sim released to the public. So what is the system? Well, the metaphor part of their existence is fairly obvious. The system does its best to keep people, specifically black people in this case, from making things better, from having positions of power and influence. The system is meant to keep people in their place, which is generally under the boot of someone else. Which is a solid flooping metaphor, I can't argue with that, but what actually does the system do? Who are these people? Where does their influence come from? What specific goals do they have? We aren't really given much of an idea at all. We do confirm that Edwin Alva is one of their members, as is this NSA agent, and there is also someone who is dressed in a turban. He looks like a Middle Eastern man, but I don't know who he is or what he's doing here. The shorthand that we are being given is that the system is made up of people who are in influential positions of power, exemplified by Alva, who is a head of the tech industry, and the NSA agent, who is part of the National Security Agency, and they have their own agenda. Is that agenda defending their personal fortunes? If the global economy tanked, that would certainly hurt Alva's pocketbooks, but I can't really see it ruining the NSA agent's life. The agent claims that she never wants to feel powerless again, so she is joining this group to have power and influence, it seems. But how she's going to gain power and influence, and to do what non-metaphorical end? I do not know. And honestly, I have to ask, is the system even a thing anymore? After its public reveal in Hardware issue 6, is nobody looking into this? This comic leaves us with 3 concepts at the end of it that need exploring as far as broadening the world of Milestone. That's Xiomara's love core and their role in the Milestone universe and Raquel's life, Raquel's new school situation, and the threat of the system. This ending would generally indicate an escalation in attacks, right? With the NSA agent's personal grudge pitting the entire system against Rocket and Icon. But if the system was exposed in Hardware, and Alva was already being investigated for a number of causes thanks to the ending of that book, is the system still a threat? And if they aren't a threat, then why would you bother making this ending? I have to admit that this is one of the things that I think Icon and Rocket is very weak in. The small corner of the Dakotaverse that is created here is very interesting to me. I like the United States knowing about aliens and acting against them in defense of America. I like Icon's hidden history with the United States. I think that's ripe for exploration and tons of back matter. I like Xiomara and how she represents an ideological threat to Icon's relationship with Rocket and a whole new concept, the love cores, to explore. And I like Rocket and Icon themselves, to be quite honest. But this comic tries really hard to connect to other parts of the Milestone universe, and it is there where things really trip up the story for me. Icon and Rocket become superheroes roughly 2 weeks before the Big Bang happens, and they are made aware of the Big Bang during their appearance in the Milestone Returns one-shot. Their scene in that comic ends with them saying that they need to do something about the Big Bang. But then they don't do anything about the Big Bang. There is a setup there, and there is no payoff at all. Static, and actually my main man Darius, managed to show up in Raquel's school, which I do think is a neat bit of shared universe work, but Virgil doesn't really feel like himself in that scene. I could see Static following Raquel and Bryce because something felt off about Bryce, but Virgil comes off as a lovesick puppy the entire time, trying desperately to win Rocket's affection. But when we're over in Static's comic, he's crushing on Frida. And even then, that idea was barely explored in that comic, even when they were both in life-or-death situations together. The version of Static that we get here in this comic doesn't really feel like the version that we got over in his own comic, nor does it really feel like an extension of him. To be fair, Hudlin does nail his science nerd side, though. When Static meets Lilbit, he immediately starts asking questions about how she shrinks and where her mass goes when she does it. And I mean, she shrugs them all off, but that does feel very on point for him. As a science nerd, that kind of stuff would drive Virgil wild. And finally, here at the end of the comic, we have the reveal that Edwin Alva was a part of the system, connecting this comic's universe to hardware. But like I already pointed out, that entire situation doesn't really make sense. Last I knew, Alva was being investigated by the federal government and was in their custody. So, was he released? I wouldn't mind that. I'm not saying that couldn't have happened, as the whole point of the system is that the rich manipulate things to get their way. So the system pulling some strings and getting Alva released would make complete sense and fit the themes. But if that's what happened, tell me that's what happened. Have someone comment on, they had to spend a lot of money and burn a lot of favors to get you released, Alva. You better come through on this. Or if this moment happens before his arrest in Hardware, then he should have made a comment on his ongoing hunt for Metcalf, just to place his appearance within some kind of timeline. And it wouldn't have even been that bad. He could have been like, I'm going to have the perfect weapon to use against Icon and Rocket once I get my hands on all that hardware. Boo! And then you go read Hardware's comic. The shared universe of comics is honestly a personal favorite of mine. I grew up inside of Marvel's and, the shared universes of even its own comic lines, like the 2099 set of titles, or the MC2 titles, or even the Ultimate books, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but again, the tight continuity of those makes sense to me. I fell in love hard with cross-gen shared universe when I found it, and if I have any problem with DC's shared universe, it's that they blow the entire thing up every couple of years, and so their books feel incredibly disjointed and like they aren't part of a shared universe at all. Cross-gen launched with 4 ongoing titles in 1 quarterly book, and all of their titles lined up like puzzle pieces. They all complemented each other perfectly. All of the hints and clues that built upon each other just all fit together, right? And then Milestone has relaunched for a second time with just 3 titles, and they fit together like puzzle pieces made of Play-Doh. Sure, they can fit together if you kind of mash the edges a little bit and blend them. Weirdly, this Milestone book has another particular bit of continuity weirdness to it. I hesitate to call it a problem, but it's got like another concept layered in. You see, this universe is an alternate DC Comics universe. I've already talked about how Icon is conceptually a black Superman. He is an alien that fell to Earth, he was raised by human parents, he became a superhero, and has an almost identical power set. Xiomara is, conceptually, Black Wonder Woman. She is a physical Amazon, as opposed to a literal Amazon, fighting with a sword and the power of love alongside a sisterhood of like-minded women. For Wonder Woman, it's the Amazons. For Xiomara, it's the Love Corps. Lilbit is easily a counterpart for the Atom, who is a shrinking hero in the DC comics. As I said earlier, though, these characters are built that way as a form of storytelling shorthand. We can tell things about these characters because of their unconscious associations with DC characters without knowing anything else about their backgrounds. But when Augustus tells Raquel about Lord's actions as an alien hunter for the United States government, he says that Lord hunted down and killed an alien baby that crashed in Kansas in 1939. Originally, I thought this was just a cute conceptual nod to Superman, who originally crash-landed in Kansas in 1938 in the real world, so that timeline makes sense. But then, later on, Augustus says that Lord, quote, killed the last Kryptonian, end quote. So Lord killing baby Kal-El wasn't just a cute Easter egg, it's continuity. There was a Krypton in Milestone's universe, and it was destroyed, and there was, or I guess there could have been, anyways, a Superman, if the United States government didn't fear his potential so much. Additionally, Augustus refers to Lord as, quote, the Manhunter from Mars, end quote, which is a very obvious nod to John Johns, who is a member of the Justice League and who is also the final surviving Martian and whose code name is the Martian Manhunter. So the Milestone universe that we are meeting here in these comics is not its own thing, standing alone in the world of comic book publishing. It is a part of the DC multiverse, and all that entails. From a creative standpoint, this does have its ups and downs. On the one hand, part of me doesn't like it because it makes the Milestone books feel secondary. They are not their own set of titles. They are a subset of what DC does now. DC has number 1, Milestone is number 2. But on the other hand, if I was launching a new comic book universe and DC or Marvel said that I could play in their sandbox, man, I'd do it. It's important to keep in mind that many of the founders of Milestone originally worked for Marvel and DC, and would have grown up reading about those characters, and the new authors and artists writing and drawing those books now have done the same. They all love Superman and Wonder Woman just as much as the fans do, so getting the chance to include them in their own stories might be an opportunity that is just too rich to pass up. There's also the unfortunate meta-truth that, let's face it, Milestone isn't going to take over DC Comics in the sales charts. Marvel, DC, and Image Comics have a solid lock on the top 3 positions in the market, and that isn't likely to change without some kind of huge sea change in the culture of comic books in America. Milestone will always be below those companies in this country, so maybe standing on their own isn't as important as laying down an interesting foundation. Connecting their titles to DC's universe also allows for intercompany crossovers. Milestone and DC have already crossed over once before, back in 1994's Worlds Collide event, and establishing Milestone as part of that fabric does leave the door open to those kinds of stories, which would bring a lot of attention and potential sales to the Milestone books. For me, again, it feels really early to leave space for a big DC crossover when your own titles don't line up very well continuity-wise, but I will admit that I find the prospect exciting. So larger concepts aside, how did I find the book? Overall, I think that Icon and Rocket is probably the single best executed out of all of the Milestone books. Icon and Rocket have a great chemistry. Raquel is all passionate action. She wants to get out and do things without even thinking about the consequences, right? Icon, however, is experienced intellect, having already gone out and done things his entire life, and seen no improvement in humanity over that time. He sees helping humanity as a waste of time, and Raquel looks at humanity and has to try, at least. Give them the same chance that she was given, right? So she will charge into something. A fight, an argument, any situation, all righteous anger and passionate causes, and generally speaking, screw something up. Icon then coaches her on how to do better, or at the very least they'll have a discussion about it that reveals a part of humanity that maybe Icon has forgotten, or ignored, or pushed down in him. They're a really well-balanced duo, and I think that they complement each other very well. Obviously, the book's physical threat is Benedict Lord, but its conceptual threat is drugs and the systems that rely on drugs to exist, which I feel is handled really intelligently. Rocket starts off her goals very small, thinking that kicking the butts of the dealers is going to be enough, but, then there's a power vacuum. Then there's the pressure put on from the drug lords. Then there's a pressure from the governments relying on that money moving through their economies. Each time they try to do something, Icon has to teach Rocket about how these things are connected and how they build on each other. In issue 5, she even gives a bit of a speech about how their actions have actually hurt some people. Because with drugs gone, the addicts have turned to more dangerous substances in order to get a high. And without drugs to take the edge off of their misery, a lot of people are quitting their jobs, causing many businesses to close, further hurting the economy and the lives of those business owners. The simple idea of just get rid of the drug dealers sounds simple and great, but the problems that lead people to drugs are so much more complicated than just having access to them. And that's really the thing that Icon and Rocket, and honestly us as people, need to address in order to have any kind of positive impact on the situation. As much as I do like that story, there are some basic problems with some of the minor story beats. It's established early on in the comic that the NSA knows about Augustus and that he has a history with them. His contact comes to visit him at the law firm that he runs and is basically like, hey, stop kicking over bees' nests, we need you to calm down. And he basically goes, what are you going to do? You can't kill me. So mind your own business. But then Benedict Lord is sent after Icon, and no one goes to Augustus's address. No one attacks his home or his business, and he owns both of those things legally, so they've got to be on record with the government, and Lord is working for the government. I also don't understand why Augustus insisted that Raquel go back to school after her home was attacked. Like, you know that Lord is out there hunting for her in order to get at Augustus. So why not just keep Raquel safe in the mansion, which apparently no one seems to know about? Or, if you are going to send Raquel to school, then do so as a ruse, right? Draw out Lord. That makes way more sense to me than letting a man-sized cockroach start a street fight in a populated city. Artistically, this is probably my favorite comic as well. Doug Braithewaite has a pretty realistic style, and he takes time to make sure that every character looks unique and that they have their own facial figures. And we get a lot of shots of people in the city, people commenting to news cameras, police officers, victims of attacks, all kinds of people. There are a lot of jump cuts in this book, very similar to Hardware, but Braithewaite draws backgrounds in most, if not all, of his panels, which builds the world that they're moving in much more concretely. As such, there is way less storytelling confusion on my part, where in Hardware, characters would just never be in any panels and then suddenly be in a panel attacking Hardware. Here, you see them. When some drug dealers suddenly appear in panel 3 of a page, I know where they came from because they were established in panel 1 in the background trying to follow Mrs. Irvin. That's great visual storytelling. The realistic artwork also helps to ground those themes of drug use and the realistic reactions that happen because of Icon and Rocket's actions. The coloring of the book is generally pretty muted, sticking close to the colors of reality, of course, save for Rocket, Icon, and Xiomara's costumes. The special effects of the book are nicely colored, especially the heat beams that we see Icon firing off kind of frequently. He uses those really quickly. And the force field effect that Rocket has. The pages and panels flow well, and overall, the book just looks like a classic superhero book. And that's probably the wrong thing. It doesn't look classic, because when I think classic, I think the bright, semi-obnoxious colors of the 1960s and 70s. This doesn't have those bright animated colors that they put in Static, nor does it have the heavy, oppressive shadows that we saw in Hardware, right? If anything, the coloring reminds me of Andrew Currie's work on Marvel's The Ultimates back in 2002. So, again, we've got that grounded, realistic feel. What if superheroes existed but in the real world kind of thing? Oddly enough, that same Andrew Currie did work on this comic, but as an inker instead of a colorist. Small world, right? So I fully endorse this book. Out of the 3 Milestone launch titles, Icon and Rocket is the most conceptually put together, and for me, the best executed. Static comes in with a close second because it has super strong character work, and I really do like the animated feeling that the comic has, echoing his cartoon fame. Hardware, unfortunately, is last, with a complicated and interesting lead character that I want to know more about, but he's got a very ill-thought-out world, a very vaguely defined threat, and a supporting cast that could kind of star in their own comic book. But unfortunately, they are trapped behind the bulky frame of Hardware's ugly armor. Sorry, Hardware, that armor never won me over. Next week, we take our first step outside of Dakota City and meet a whole new set of lead characters, new hidden threats, and an idea with the potential to save the world. Or ruin it. Kelly Vu and David Kim have revolutionized nanotechnology. With their miniature devices, they could regrow human limbs in seconds, heal life-threatening wounds in mere moments. Immortality itself is at humanity's fingertips. But there are those who fear that power, and their attempt to ruin Kelly and David's plans will go fantastically wrong. Join me in a week for episode 22.7 of Comic Book Breakdown, Duo. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.